Our guest speaker tonight, he was here once before. I did an excellent demo. I think he did it at the Boys Club. And I don't think we had this many there, I don't know. But this guy is always at the wood shows. If you do the wood show circuit, you'll see him there. So let's welcome Ralph Swan from Minwax.
Thank you, everybody. After that much appreciation, I can just go home now at this point. We're going to just move the table over a little bit. Thanks very much for having me down to your club. This is a great turnout. A lot of guys here and a lot of projects on the go. I'm sure I've already had a number of questions already tonight, so I know that there's lots of questions out there and a lot of interest in the topic tonight. And one of the things I always like to say about woodworkers is that with this many woodworkers in the room, you'll never get two guys that finish the same way. So feel free to take what I know and take it home with you and use those tips in your projects, or ask me a question about anything you got going on and I'll try to help you out.
There you go.
But usually I want to always try to start off with a little bit of talking a little bit about old pieces of furniture, because we're not necessarily always doing the projects you're doing here in the shop. You may be doing something at home. You might have picked something up off the side of the road or anything like that. Pick up a piece of furniture and it's got a good shape to it. It's got some good life left into it. You could be repurposing it. You could be doing any number of things. A lot of people see something like this and they'll take it and they'll go and first thing they'll do is they'll take their sander to it and try to take all the finish off it to get back to the real wood. Well, if this is a piece of furniture that's already been shaped, that's the worst thing you can do, is actually take a sander to it. You really want to just take the finish off, not take the wood away here. Because what you want to do is keep your wood consistent. So with a project like this, what I'll usually do is suggest to you that, always put on some protective gear and make sure you're protecting yourself and the environment around you. And I'm not going to do much here with this. I'm just going to give you a little example of how this works. This is an antique refinisher. Now, when you look at a piece of furniture like this, you can see that it's got a natural style finish on it, and you could say, well, gee, like that looks like. Just take the paint and varnish remover to that and remove that off. Instead of using a paint and varnish remover, what I usually suggest is using an antique refinisher. And the only time an antique refinisher won't take off a natural finish like this is if it happens to be a polyurethane or a spar varnish or some heavy body varnish on it. But if it's a lacquer, shellac, or a varnish, it will cut through that very quickly. When you go to use this product, when you pour it out, just always pour a small amount into the vessel. You don't want to pour too much in there because you don't want to have it evaporate into the air. Like if I'm working on a project, I'll put a little bit more than that in there. But for this demonstration, all I want to do is show you how this product works. Using a 3-0 or 4-0 steel wool is what you want to work with. Take it, dip it into your antique refinisher, moisten the surface, and just let it sit on there for a couple seconds. Don't just automatically start working with your steel wool. What you want to do is let the product bite into it and actually start to work on it. So once you get it to sit on there for a few seconds, re-wet your steel wool, wring it out, and then just go back in a gentle circular action. You can see that you can take it off just that quick and easy. Once you get it loosening up like that, all you do is take a clean cloth. I have to apologize for the odor if it's going to be a little bit strong in here. But as you can see, that quick and that easy, you can move that off there. Now, if it happens to be a painted surface or a heavy polyurethane finish on there, this antique refinisher won't cut into it, right? So you have to use something that's a little bit more stronger, a little bit heavier body to it. So that's where you will go into using a paint and varnish remover like so. If you take your paint and varnish remover, you pick up the can and you give it a good shake, you can hear that it's very thick inside there. Always, what you want to do whenever you're using any of these products, always kind of take a few seconds and just read the side panel on there. I know it requires putting the glasses on most of the time to read those little fine prints. But what it'll tell you on here is some important information so that you understand what you're working with and how to work with it. With this product, if you don't shake it up properly at the start, what's going to happen when you pour it into the container, the product that's actually going to do the stripping for you will still be in here. It's a heavy gel that's going to pour out first, right? So always make sure you shake it up well. When you're working with a paint and varnish remover, take an inexpensive natural bristle brush, and that'll be your dedicated paint and varnish remover brush, because once you use it for that, it's no good for anything else, right? Just an inexpensive brush. When you put the paint and varnish remover onto the surface, what you want to do is brush it on in one direction only. Don't brush it back and forth. If you brush it back and forth, it'll evaporate off. It'll just evaporate into the air, and it won't take the finish off. It'll just dissipate into the air. So by putting that on there and leaving it on, and you let the product actually start to work, and you'll see it start to bubble up. You'll see where the paint and varnish remover will actually start to bubble and loosen the old finish. And usually at that point, everybody gets excited. First thing they do is they take their metal scraper and they start going at it like this, right? Start pushing on it. And they find that there's some of it's coming off, but some of the areas that it doesn't come off, so they push a little harder. When you start doing that, what you're going to do is take that sharp scraper and scar the wood underneath it. So instead of doing that, what you want to do is make yourself up a little push stick like this. Just a piece of hardwood, shape it to a chisel point on the end, like so. Once that softens up, you should be able to just push it off there. You shouldn't have to scrape at it. You shouldn't have to gouge the wood underneath it. You really want to make sure you clean, just take as much of the heavy body off there. Now, what happens usually when most people take a paint and varnish remover to a project, they'll get it to bubble, they'll start to see the movement, they'll push it off, and then they'll leave it alone, and they'll come back to it later on and try to get the rest of it off. Usually what you're left with is a kind of a gummy residue, right? Instead of leaving that gummy residue there to go back hard again, the best thing to do is take your antique refinisher, which is the liquid one that I just showed you with using the steel wool, and take that liquid product, moisten the surface, and just go along and just gently dissolve that old finish off there, and it'll just clean it right off. And by using the two products together, you can actually create a good finish, a good removal of the finish off there. The nice thing about doing that and using the steel wool is you don't have to, with the antique refinisher, you don't have to use anything to neutralize it. You don't have to do any sanding on the wood, because you're using steel wool as your abrasive at this point, so you don't have to take anything to it again to move it off. The worst thing that can happen is most times when you're using paint and varnish remover and you get the paint to start to move, and then you come back to it later and you go to try to take it off, everybody gets into the same point. It's really hard to get off, so what the first thing they do is they take their sander out to it, right, and try to go at it. The problem with a sander is if it's any lead paint in there, and some of these old pieces of furniture might have it in there, if you start sanding it, it's just going to be airborne particles that's going into your lungs. So always use a restripper to take off old finishes on old pieces of furniture. That way you can actually bring them back to the natural wood, not lose any volume off the wood, and really create a new finish back on there with virtually no damage to the wood surface underneath. Antique refinisher doesn't dry out the wood, so it doesn't create a white haze on the wood or anything like that. It's just going to take the finish off the surface. It's not going to take the patina out of the wood or anything like that. It's just going to do that for you. Now, if you're working at tight spots, you can also, these little brass bristles brushes work great to come in those tight little areas. You know, a lot of times people will see these little spots here as an ideal spot where they'll take a dental pick or something like that and go in there and try to pick out the finishes. The problem with a dental pick is it's a very hard, sharp metal object, and you're going to go in there and scar that wood, and that's a lot of open grain across there, cross grain. You're just going to create more damage in there and more darkening on there. So just using a brass bristle stripping brush is a good way to go on there. Anybody have any questions on stripping? Not on the type you see in the bar, but...
Are you saying that once you strip it off, you don't sand it at all?
No, there's no need to sand it at that point. Because you're using a 3-0 or 4-0 steel wool, it's acting as an abrasive. Like a 4-0 steel wool is like about a 220 grit paper. It will open up the pores of the wood to allow you to penetrate a new finish back into it. So you don't have to, you don't lose, if you take a piece of sandpaper to that piece of wood, at this point, what's going to happen is you're going to lose that patina, right? You're going to lose that natural aging effect that's happened over the years, and it's going to take and lighten that wood up. And then if you happen to have something that has a veneer on it, you're going to wear through that veneer very quickly as well. So sanding on finished pieces of furniture is not usually a good way to go. Always it's better to strip it off. Yes?
Does it work on any paints? Is it paint removal?
The paint varnish remover, it will work on pretty much all paints. Now, the thing that will happen, you'll find, is sometimes you have to leave it on a little longer than other times. What I find, if it's a very thick paint or there's a lot of coats on there, you might have to leave it on for a longer period of time, like about 45 minutes. The big secret is when you're putting paint and varnish remover on, and if you put a coat on there and you need to leave it on longer, just keep it wet. As long as it stays wet, it stays active. If you let it dry out, then it stops working and it's just going to harden up on the surface. But if it's still moist, it'll still keep working its way through the layers of paint. And the reason that is the gel body on the top actually kind of protects the chemical that's doing the stripping below, and you can actually keeps working its way down. So it stops it from going up, it just keeps it working down. And then also with this, when you take and remove the old paint off the surface, you can actually just push it into a cardboard box and then throw it out in the regular household waste. Once it goes back to solid again, it's not harmful to dispose of. So you don't have to worry about the lead part of it or anything else like that. You have a question?
Is there an amount of time you need to allow it to sit in order for the varnish remover or the antique refinisher to evaporate before applying a new finish?
No, not with the antique refinisher. You'll find that it evaporates off the surface within about probably 10 minutes. It dries up that quickly on the surface. So there's not a long period of time. Usually what I'll do is I'll go through it and do what I call a rough wash, where I'll try to take off most of the finish the first time through. Then I'll come back with clean, fresh product and fresh steel wool and just go back and clean any spots off of it and just get rid of any residue that's left behind. But really, you'll find that once you clean you get all the old finish off, you can go ahead and start refinishing later that same day. Or I usually give it a few hours just so that all the carriers and everything evaporate out of it. But it really doesn't take a long time, no, because it evaporates fairly quickly.
And with the other one, you would have to wait longer?
The paint and varnish remover, it's a little bit more, the thing you got to worry about with paint and varnish remover is if it gets down into the cracks of any crevices or anything like that, you want to make sure that that's out of there. That's the only thing you really got to, because you don't want it leaching back out afterwards, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes?
How about fumes?
Fumes, it's always, like as you can see, it was pretty strong in here just for that little bit that I had out. The best place to work on doing a refinishing project is outside, obviously, is a good place. But I usually find that in a carport, or if you have a pop-up tent or something like that that you can work out of, that's a good area to work to. You'll find that it's just a matter of, I'm just going to try to wrap this up in here to get rid of the odor a bit.
Respirator.
Well, respirator will be fine too as well, but you'll find it's not really, if you're out in the fresh air, it's not a problem. It's a matter of how much lingers in a building, right? Good air circulation is always going to help you. Like, usually what I find is the best thing to do is have a floor fan, like even just a small round floor fan going across, because all the carriers lay heavy, right? And they lay down low. So if you can have something that circulates the air out, that's usually a good way to get rid of the fumes and the odors at that point. I would not try to do this project indoors with, in a house or anything like that. It's too much. And again, some areas you have to watch. If you're trying to, refinish inside, then you need to make sure you have good adequate ventilation, that you can pull the air through to get rid of it out of there. Yes. Sure.
Can you get larger sizes than that?
In the paint and varnish remover, you can get it in a gallon size. Usually in the antique refinisher, you're better off staying in a smaller size. The problem is if you have a part can left over, it evaporates out of there pretty quickly. So it's really, you have to try to use it up in the project as much as possible so you don't have a lot of sitting around, because it will dissipate itself in time, right? I find that, to do a small dresser, you're probably, if you have the two 1 liter cans, you can pretty much do a dresser right there. If you're doing chairs and that where there's a lot of intricate things, it takes a little bit more product because you waste a little bit just brushing it on and that type of thing. If you have an area that's really hard to get it to stay wet and stay active, The thing to do is if it's a leg or something like that, you can take a bit of 2 mil poly, put a nice general coat on there, and then wrap it around there to keep the air away from it, and just let it work on there. And then when you peel this off, you can do it. But always do a kind of a test. Just take your little push stick and push on it to see if it's actually taking it down to the bare wood. If it's not, just leave it wet and keep it working on there, and work in a small area at a time. That's really the key. You don't want to have a lot of it sitting out and have it dry up on you and evaporate off before you get a chance to use it. So work in those small areas. Find if you haven't got the patience to sit and wait for a piece to work, have 2 small areas going at the same time. Work on one for a bit and then go to the other one, work back and forth. Me, I can sit down with a book and read for a few minutes between sections and just kind of keep an eye on it and work from that way. But it's all a personal thing to keep in mind. Now, yes?
Do you have any problems with vertical surfaces versus horizontal?
Verticals are always more of a challenge because gravity always kind of happens to us all, right? Like it just everything kind of settles to the bottom. With a paint and varnish remover, because of the heavy body, it does that as well. If you're working off a vertical surface, take and wrap it with a little bit of 2 mil poly vapor barrier or a dry cleaner bag, and that will keep it up in place and it'll keep it active. That's the best way to do that. Yeah. Okay. I don't want to spend all night on refinishing, but I know that's always one of those little projects that everybody gets into every once in a while, and I like to share those tips on it because it can make it very quick and easy to do a refinishing project, and there is some really precious piece of furniture out there that you'd like to refinish. The only caution I will tell to everybody is that if you think there is some monetary value to the piece of furniture before you start removing any kind of finish off it, always take and have it professionally appraised. It just you might have the rare piece that's worth a lot of money. To most of us, it's just a good piece of furniture that we want to continue to use and we want it to look good. So a lot of times you're just removing the finish and carrying on. A few basic rules of thumb that I always follow when it comes to putting finishes on, and that is that we all have to go through those same process of actually setting up a proper finishing area. Have some place. Just don't grab the dining room table and bring your piece of lumber out onto it and start working on it. You won't gain many friends doing that. And
great thing if anybody's interested for stripping finish off of wood. You know those little things that your wife gets that plug in the wall? The little ball things that make a rope like they...
Oh, yes.
You've seen them?
Yeah.
The incense balls?
Yeah, the incense that plug into the lighter, like into your wall socket, and you screw them in. I don't know what's in those, but my wife had one and she changed it and she set it on our dining room table. It was there like 5 minutes and it ate right through the finish.
A lot of times you'll see furniture that happens to, and nail polish remover will do the same. Perfume will do the same to it. If it's a lacquer finish on it or varnish or shellac, acetone that's in a lot of those products will just kind of eat right through it. Alcohol will do the same to it. If you have polyurethanes, you won't be able to touch it won't affect it. But those are usually what happens. A lot of times the other thing you see when you're refinishing pieces of furniture, a lot of times people are refinishing because the finish looks tired, it looks a little bit worn or whatever. Not necessarily you have to refinish every piece of furniture. Sometimes it's a matter of cleaning the finish and reapplying a fresh coat of paste wax to it a lot of times. When over the years people will have old piece of furniture and they'll take it and they find that the finish is starting to look a little tired, so what they'll do is they'll start putting on Pledges or Panel Magic or a number of Murphy's oil soaps and different things like that, and they leave residue behind. One of the biggest problems is that residue will kind of go hazy after a while, so you might need to do a clean. Usually prior to refinishing any piece of furniture, the first thing I'll always do is just take something just as basic as a bit of paint thinner, like this. Take a little bit of paint thinner, take 2 clean cloths, moisten one with a bit of paint thinner, and have a dry cloth. Wet it down, wipe it up. See what you're getting off on that dry cloth, because a lot of times if it's oils, waxes, or anything like that, it'll come off of the paint thinner. The paint thinner won't affect the finish underneath, but it will get rid of the grime off the surface. Sometimes it's a matter of just cleaning that up and get rid of that off the surface, and then putting on a fresh coat of paste wax or something over top of it to give it a little bit of protection. So check it out first, and it's always a good idea to clean it do a paint thinner wash on a piece of furniture before you go to start to stripping, because what it'll do is get rid of all that grime off there, even from the skin, from people's handling it over the years. The oils from your skin will be attached to the furniture. By cleaning it off first, it's going to make your antique refinisher and your paint and varnish remover work that much better on the finish, because it doesn't have to go through that old wax or anything like that, and you're going to get rid of that wax off your surface, right? So those are things to keep in